Thanks for making time. As usual, I made a couple of updates to the committee work plan. If you have the hyperlink there, you can click on it in the agenda. If not, I can share my screen. Do folks want me to share my screen? Ruth, would that be helpful, or can you see it?
Sorry, Ruth, you were on mute. Go ahead.
I think I can see it, but I'm not positive yet.
Okay.
Got it.
Okay, so there aren't too many changes to this. I didn't add in any new items per se. I updated the status on things that we have now done. So for instance, we completed the design of the advisory committee application on row 23. We're in the process of designing the schedule of meetings and topics, and we're in the process of soliciting members. We're not yet up to selecting. So you'll see some of those status changes. The one thing I wanted to make sure to share with everybody, Ruth and I were contacted by folks from the Human Rights Committee of the Society of Friends and a number of others working on human rights issues to put in a proposal to the National Council for the Social Studies Conference, which was to happen in DC this September. Shalina Warren, who is a nationally board certified teacher at Dunbar High School, is also on that panel, and our proposal was accepted. So we are go to present at the National Council for the Social Studies. Now comes the question on when that conference will actually happen. So most folks on the panel have agreed that they would prefer to present in person at the rescheduled conference, which is supposed to happen this December. Next December. What I think is really funny is that they're holding the 101st NCSS conference in Minnesota next November, and then they are holding the 100th annual conference in DC next December. I don't understand it. It doesn't make any sense to me, but I double checked on their website that that's what they were calling it, and it is. So at any rate, that is still a year plus from now when we will have the chance to be on that panel, but we'll be on that panel, and I think we'll be at a great place in our work to talk about the process of the social studies. I do know that Ms. Warren from Dunbar told me she was applying to be part of the panel, the committee. So hopefully she will also have some thoughts to share, whether she's selected for our committee or she works with Aussie on the writing. I think it'll just be a nice opportunity for us to get some attention for the work we'll have been pretty deeply engaged in by that point. I don't have any other updates on this, but if folks have questions about any of the items on the project plan, I'm happy to talk about them. Ruth, you're on mute.
No, I just said, is there anything else that was changed that we should just take note of, or?
I think there was one other status change. Yeah, I moved the social studies conference because they are going to do a virtual conference this December and then the in-person next December. So I just marked those things on the status sheet. Nothing else.
Okay. Thank you.
Yeah. Okay. So the next item on our agenda is the big one, updates on our advisory panel applications and talking about how we're going to select applicants, as well as if there's any other targeted outreach we want to do to make sure we get a good diversity of panelists. So Alex, can I hand this to you for a second to give us the overview that you sent documents for yesterday?
Yeah, that sounds good. Can everybody hear me?
Yes.
So yesterday I shared with everyone just some kind of redacted and anonymized applicant info. I did just go on and check the application. I think now we have 75 applicants to the committee. So that's, I think, 10 more than yesterday, if I'm doing my math correctly. And you'll see in kind of the charts that were pulled together, thank you to Google Surveys for producing those very nicely and quickly, that there's representation, I think, from different places and different sectors. Whether it's equitable representation, I think is a different question to some of the cases that Dr. Sutter had raised related to different groups that we may wish to do more strategic outreach to. Did everybody have a chance to at least briefly skim those charts and have like a rough idea of who the applicant pool is to date? I'm seeing nods, so I think that's a yes. And so, yeah, Ruth, you're on.
I saw it yesterday, but now I don't see where to get it. I don't think it's on either yours or Jessica's recent emails, unless I'm totally missing it.
I can share my screen and I'll have it up here in a second.
Or it might be easier just to send the link, Jessica, because it won't fit on one screen. So we'd all be having to.
Okay. It's in an email from Alex yesterday at 2:22. Forward it to you.
Well, I can find it.
I sent it to your me.com.
All right.
And so just kind of some high level things. One thing that I actually, going into this process, I'm more surprised about is the number of people that actually have replied yes to experience with reviewing and revising. That may not be surprising to other folks, but I actually was pleasantly surprised that nearly 2/3 of respondents actually said yes. And so it seems that, not only is there an interest in the topic at large, but also potentially some actual expertise within this area, which I think is really valuable. The next few charts kind of provide just general overviews of, the background of the applicants. I think Dr. Sutter had noted stuff related to ECE applicants, but it does look like we have a pretty good sampling and representation of the different content expertise areas, at least the 5 or 6 that we have provided as options. Again, another thing that I will note that I think we really should work to push on these next couple of days via social media is that this application is open to students. I think we, again, still have only 1 student who has applied to the committee. I don't know if there is anything else that we can do. I think John Paul has shared the application with the current SAC committee, and there might be other ways to target students as well. I believe Dr. Sutter in her email had raised pieces about kind of race and ethnicity. We had some discussion with Dr. Gasoy related to any maybe particular outreach we might want to do to some of the Hispanic, Latino, Latina, Latinx populations. And I think that does lead us to what Dr. Sutter was saying at the top of the call, or at the top of this portion of the section of the meeting, is, do we want to do some strategic outreach to particular groups of folks? And if so, how do we want to do that? Do we want to extend the deadline for those particular folks? Also recognizing that there is a short window of turnaround time between identifying candidates, letting them know they've been selected, and being prepared for that first meeting, which I think is July 7th, which is now less than a month away. So I'll stop there and see if there are any other big questions. In the documents I did share with you all, as I noted, everything was anonymized, and I removed all of the kind of long answer responses. The responses that you all saw were much more related to kind of demographic things and not necessarily the narrative pieces folks provided.
Thank you so much, Alex. Before I ask questions of other members on the call, I really appreciate all the work that the staff did to help make sure that we got this application out in email to a broad cross-section of folks. I had shared with all of you the spreadsheet of like the target audience we had. I dropped in as many emails as I could. I know some of you dropped in emails as well, and the staff put out a mass email to folks I did some targeted follow-up to a few people on that list. And I sent it out to all of my school leaders in Ward 6 to make sure that they could communicate it. I also sent it to the Ward 6 Public School Parent Organization. But I don't think we would have gotten 75 applicants for this volunteer opportunity had we not done such great outreach. So I really just appreciate everyone's efforts on that. What are thoughts that you all have or questions you have about how we best use the next couple of days to try to add pieces that are missing from the diversity of the applicant pool? And or what are your thoughts on giving more time for this?
I'm not sure that we necessarily need to do more time, but if we have the ability to do more time, that I don't think that's necessarily a bad thing. I do want to note that with 70 something applications, that's going to take a lot of time for members to go through and rank appropriately and give due consideration to. I think there are certainly some things that we can continue to look at to try to bulk up the individual parts that we think may be missing, like the ECE, special education, and student representatives. I think that's absolutely fine and good. I just I want to note that 70 takes a long time to get through, and we don't have all of that much time to make sure that we have the right people in the room to start this meeting next month or at the end of this June, whenever we're doing it.
Yeah, no, I agree. Thanks for that, John Paul. Other thoughts? Karen? You're on mute, my friend.
Oh man.
No, we got you now.
I agree with John Paul's assertion. Having gone through this process, this has been the third time I've gone through this type of process. It takes an inordinate amount of time. All the applications, decide who will best, how we have a good match of people, not everybody with the same opinion, but how we have a diverse match of people, and then get decided. And I'm also concerned with the fact that because of what's going on with COVA, that we still might not be able to start at the time that you're setting to move forward. So I think we need to take those things into consideration.
Thank you, Karen. Ruth?
So I'm going through and I think this is the case, but I can't totally tell. But what I think we don't have a lot of is higher ed. And if we're making a list of additional outreach, which I think is a good idea, that's the other one that I would put on this list. And I don't know where we sent it. I think we sent it to deans, maybe also to the chairs of the history departments, the chairs of the, I guess that's what I would do, maybe in addition to the deans, or a special outreach to both of those groups at all of our different local colleges, universities.
Got it. I'm just checking in here. I want to sort. You're right. We've only got 2 higher ed folks. And one is not a local.
I can certainly go back and look for higher ed folks from in history and civics and that type of thing around. But if others have specific people that they think may be really good or maybe really interesting on this, I think that would be helpful to find information for as well.
I will think.
I have a couple, John Paul, and I'm happy to I'll just CC you on the outreach to those folks so that you see that it's happened. I did send it to the Ed.D program at American University, I guess Saturday night. I was reaching out to the director of that program for another reason, and I made sure that she had it. So she shared it with her doctoral students as well as with some other faculty in the program. So we'll make sure that I do the same thing. I feel like, was Kristin Sinclair from Georgetown on our original list? Does anyone remember? Sarah, I'm thinking like it'd be silly if I didn't make sure that Kristin had seen this.
No, I sent it to her specifically, and I also let her know that she could share it with anybody in the program. And I do think I saw her application on there. So
it's also possible that folks have identified in different ways. So I have not read through the great spreadsheet Alex shared yesterday in great detail. Like I did a quick skim, but I'll do a longer read of that before I send out my target emails. I did tell John Paul about a Georgetown law professor whose tweets I had seen over the past couple of days, who I reached out to because I guess he'd been on a Mayor Bowser commission on statehood, and he had some really interesting thoughts. And when I looked at his Twitter profile, he lists that he has expertise in any number of things related to Black history and the history of DC that I thought would be particularly intriguing. So I don't know if we'll be able to get him, but certainly seemed worth an email. Okay, so it feels like there's no objection to keeping the Friday deadline, but to doing some more targeted outreach. The one thing I didn't say in email, but is on my mind, is I also think there's an opportunity for us to work into the sort of syllabus of experiences we present to and make available to the advisory committee, any areas of weakness that we have on the committee itself. So for instance, we may bring in someone who can talk about early childhood education and social studies so that we can bulk up people's knowledge and information on that as one of the experts. I'm sort of two minds about special ed, and I'm intrigued with, when Karen comes back to us, what Karen's thoughts are on this. Because special education is about modification of instruction and modification of work to help students achieve the same learning outcomes as their peers. I'm sort of two minds of making sure we have a real strong special ed presence on the committee. I think it would be a good thing, but I also want to make sure we're not forgetting that like the point of special education is to create the accommodations that help kids learn at the same content as their peers. So I don't know if others have thoughts on that. Sometimes I get in my own head more so when we are in this pandemic time and I spend a lot of time alone.
I have a question. I mean, given everything that's going on, it's Wednesday. If we're really going to do further outreach, I would suggest that we probably should extend it, I don't know, a week to Monday to Wednesday. I have strong feelings on this, but it seems to me if we really are trying to do that, that's not going to happen between now and Friday.
I mean, so here's my question, Ruth. If we extend it till Monday, that puts us, I've got too many screens open here, so I've got to look on my phone. If we extend to Monday, that puts us at 15th. We are hoping to assemble people for a first meeting, which will absolutely be virtual, on July the 7th. So that gives us, I wouldn't say more than till Friday the 19th to really review and make selections so that we can send, thank you, we're so delighted to have you, and expect responses by Monday the 22nd so that folks can put this on their calendar. So I have not been part of these review processes before. I don't know how long this takes. I don't know what people's availability is to sort of reconvene, or if we're going to do it all over email. I think that's our next conversation, is like, what does selection look like? And how do we want to do it physically? Are we okay just trading notes over email? I would love this weekend to read applications personally, but you know, I'm open to being convinced otherwise.
I don't have a strong view. It's just if we want to get more, that's all. I don't have a strong opinion on it.
So my
Alternatively, we could start the review process this weekend, understanding we may get an additional trickle next week from additional people who apply. That would be another way to think about it.
So my suggestion,
I don't have a strong view. I just wanted to raise that.
my suggestion, if we're talking about a review, would be somewhat of a blended system of doing, the members on the committee should be expected to look through all of the things, provide ratings, and then from that, then the discussion can happen over those who score, you know, highest or those types of things. I think it does, having the discussion is really important, And I think my suggestion would be that the committee reconvene to do that type of thing, to finalize them prior to next Wednesday, so that we can do a lot of an announcement. And the timing is challenging, right? We don't necessarily have to announce them at the public meeting, but we can. The issue is we need to have time for staff or for Dr. Sutter to contact the people and confirm that they actually are still interested in doing this before we announce their names.
That seems kind.
Right. And to make sure too that the ones who we don't select, they also get an email saying, thank you so much for applying. Although we have not selected you for this particular committee, we do want to keep you in our pool of experts, and we hope that we can reach out to you when the committee has questions. Those types of happy glad type emails that you get. But we need to make sure that that is done as well as before we do anything publicly. And so I think Ruth is right in that, like, if we're talking about extending, we just need to do, I mean, if we're only talking about extending it for a weekend, then I think Ruth's right. Like, we might be able to do one draft of things for members to review over the weekend, and then have a couple more at the end of Monday, so that they on Tuesday maybe we can meet and talk about the specifics. But that requires members to make sure that they actually get their scores into us as the staff, so that we can compile them, put them all together, and have that ready for a focused discussion on Tuesday.
So let me ask this: Is there any reason we have to announce at the public meeting? So I would be inclined to give us a little more time as members and staff to review applications, make the contacts, make the outreach to folks not selected, et cetera, and make an announcement either the following week on an off cycle, or at the July 1st working session, knowing that we would have already reached out to everyone. Everyone would have already been invited to hold the time on their calendar, but that we could wait until our working session to publicly announce the members. That's my inclination, mostly so that we have enough time to deal with all of it in private, and then enjoy publicly announcing rather than racing to a public announcement.
Then is this, so I think that's fine, and I actually like doing it on the off cycle week, because it's a slow news week for us, and so it would give us something that we can talk about that week, which is not a bad thing.
Okay.
So if we do, so is the suggestion then to keep the application open through like the public meeting, or through what day do you want to keep it open, or just Monday, or what's the?
I would be inclined to keep it open through Monday, to start reviewing over the weekend the applications we had, to Ruth's good suggestion, and to close applications on Monday, close of business. But I think we should set a meeting to review, so that we can lay all that out now. Thank you for bearing with me. Like, I feel like we're muddling through it as a committee, and it's not my favorite way to do things, but I appreciate folks being patient with it. So if we were to say, and I'm gonna type this into the agenda. If we were to say we'll extend the application to Monday, (5 p.m.), and then we would review. We need to get a meeting on the calendar to review the applications as a committee.
My suggestion would be that we consider, I mean, if we're not talking about releasing until the week after, that we go ahead and give members also some time to make sure that the review is done.
Yeah.
If they can have their information to the staff by, say, noon on the 18th, and then we meet on the 19th, would that work?
That works for me.
Ruth,
and we
Does that work for you
In
too?
other words, we're making our decisions by and large, or our recommendations on the 19th. And then we have essentially a week and a half before the working meeting to get it all together, and sounds fun to me.
Okay.
thank you.
So, and I know there's timing sometimes issues on Fridays. Can we go ahead and set the time for that meeting at say 1 o'clock on Friday the 19th?
That works for me.
Actually,
Throwing it
I actually have a 1 o'clock.
Okay. Does 2 o'clock?
I have a 9 to 10, and I have a 1 to 2. Otherwise, I'm free.
I have managed to end up with no meetings on Fridays for the foreseeable future, so I am happy to go with whatever time works. I mean, I'm not gonna lie, it is nice, but I'm happy to start filling in those gaps.
Ruth, can we do 11:30 to 12:30?
Perfect.
So we and the staff will have that. We'll notice that meeting and have that ready to go for as well.
Thank you, John Paul.
2 things, I'm sort of talking this out as I'm thinking it, so we'll see if I agree with myself by the end of it. One is, it seems to me these meetings took a while when we've done them in the past, so I'm not sure an hour is a good amount is it adequate to provide. The second is, if we don't have to, I worry about doing it as an open meeting when ultimately we're looking at specific people, So I don't know if there's any way around that, or if that's a good thing to try to.
Well, it's a good suggestion, Ruth. So even if the meeting was closed, we would still need to notice it. But we can, I believe, close this close it to the public because we are dealing with a sort of personnel type issues. We haven't had an issue for that, but I think you are correct that what I think we should do is go ahead and close it to the public in terms of the discussion pieces and just have the notes being members discussed and selected members for the committee.
That's a really helpful suggestion, Ruth, and it brings up a question that I was asked by a potential applicant. We had said that we would make public the pool of applicants, and the question was asked, well, are we going to make that public by name? Are we going to make it public by content of application and role and title? Are we going to make it public by place of employment? Like, what does it mean to make public the applications we received? Or what has it meant in the past?
So I believe, and I'm actually going to the Essa webpage on our thing right now. I think we made the application public.
I think we did. I have to say that I'm thinking back on it. I found that a little uncomfortable. I mean, to make that public. So I wouldn't really be for doing that. And I think in the long run, it may even, not that anybody knows enough about how we do this, but it could discourage people from applying,
So I agree with the number of things you just said, Ruth. One thing I worry about is that I think there's a real conversation in our city that is ongoing around transparency. And I just wonder what it means to not be transparent about this if there are members pushing for transparency in other ways.
Yeah, I think, sorry, so on the Essa task force, we had announced from the beginning that applications would be made public. I think we may have published the ones that we stripped the names from. I don't know that we published the ones with names. Karen, do you remember off the top of your head?
We didn't. Oh, we didn't publish.
You're on mute. You were off mute a minute ago. There you go.
There you go. We didn't publish the names publicly of the people who applied.
Yeah. And as Alex just put into the chat, we did on the application for this one use that same language saying that you have to click this box to understand that this is public information. So I think we're okay with doing it.
Got it. So what we would say is the following people applied, and then here you can find the content of applications.
We didn't name the applicants. I think we just published the applications without the identifying information.
Got it. Okay.
Correct. That's correct.
So I mean, a lot of them are identifiable, just as in here, a lot of them are identifiable. So I still think it's a question whether we should do that. And to Jessica's question, which I think is a good question, I mean, I would make a distinction between sort of things that are more about policy and process versus personnel. And typically, so that, I mean, it's not.
My actual point, Ruth, and I will say it now that you've pointed it out, is that the legislation that Charles Allen presented, that a number of members stood alongside him and Scott Goldstein on the steps of the council, calls for the publication of the teacher in every charter school across the city, including single site schools, where that means I could know that I could find Jessica Sutter, 8th grade social studies at KIPP DC Key Academy on any Monday to Friday from X time to X time. And that provision made me deeply uncomfortable with that piece of legislation. But here, I hear a member saying, you're uncomfortable putting people's names out there with a content of a public application. So I just want to square the circle on that.
Yeah, I mean, all those names are out for DCPS, so I think that was a matter of sort of apples and apples.
It's not attached to their school for DCPS. It only says they're a DCPS employee. So it says Laura Fuchs, teacher. It does not say Laura Fuchs, Woodson High School, AP History.
I think some schools have public websites where it is, but I'm not going to be an expert on that. So I'll just leave it. As I said, I don't, I mean, I do think there's distinctions. It's not worth the debate on it. And I don't even know that I was for that part of it. So I'm not going to say either way. It's not.
If I can,
what I testified about.
I think this is a good conversation to have overall in terms of what we're doing for committees. I think at this point the horse on this one has kind of left the barn because we said in the application that we were going to do this.
Got it.
And for what it's worth,
We could switch it. So just saying.
and for what it's worth, everybody who's applied has said yes
Okay.
to this clause. If you said no,
Otherwise, they can't apply. We don't know who didn't apply, but it's.
well, if you say no, it still populates, and only one person has said no, and that just happened yesterday evening for the first time. Out of 76 has said no to that. And
Okay.
what I will
So No, I was going to say, go ahead, Alex.
what I was going to say is I would imagine that, and this gets to a process question, which might be the next part of this, like actually how are applications going to be reviewed and scored by members? I envision members receiving a relatively redacted version of the applicants, so that they are not able to see the applicant by name. To Ruth's point, yes, you might be able to figure out who it is, but to the extent possible, trying to remove some of those identifying factors at face, and just presenting each applicant as like a number, right? This is applicant number 1. And so when you're talking about folks, you're talking about them in that way.
Yep.
And what's the argument for us not seeing it? I'm just curious what the
idea is that the selection should be as blind as possible by members so that we're not influenced by individual people.
But why does that not go to the staff? I'm just saying it's an odd situation. So there's a set of people that do get to see, and then there's another set of people who don't get to see. So it's not exactly blind. It's just the members, which I don't know, to me, it's a little odd, but.
So my understanding, Ruth, is that the members are the ones making the ratings, not the staff. And so that's why our review is blind, because the staff is facilitating our review process, not putting on top their own review. And it looks like Alex is giving me the thumbs up and John Paul is furiously nodding. So.
Okay.
And then I imagine what we'll do is we'll take, you know, after everyone's reviewed the applications, whether we make a decision that everybody reviews all 75 or everybody is responsible for reviewing half of them and we do some sort of average score, we'll identify, you know, these are the top, you know, 25 candidates or top 30 candidates that folks may wish to actually physically discuss, you know, at that, what is it, the June 19th meeting.
I like that plan a lot.
Envisioning. Again, I'm open to feedback and also what has been done in the past too.
So here's a question I have, and I'll throw this to you all for thoughts and reactions. I like the idea of a blind review that would say, for instance, only tell us that we are looking at a social studies teacher or a nonprofit executive director or a education consultant without the organization title during our review of applicants. And then when we sit together to talk about the top ranked ones, it might be helpful to have more identifying information to get us to have we picked a representative pool in our blind review? Meaning, did we end up with more folks who are, you know, from small organizations versus large organizations, or the vice versa? Did we end up with more folks from DCPS versus charter? Depending on the blindness. So like knowing more about the candidates as we sit down to have the final discussion would feel like a time it might make sense to share more about who we're talking about, but not in the initial review. What are thoughts there? Marcus gave me a thumbs up and Karen is on mute.
Karen has thumbs up now, I think.
Am I on mute? I can't even tell.
We can hear you, Ruth. I heard you. That's awesome.
One clarifying question I would have directed at Dr. Sutter, who brought this up, but also everybody else, is, you know, for that first round of blind review, I think Dr. Sutter, you gave an example of how we might describe a person. Are other pieces of information that you think should be redacted in that first review, but then brought forward in the second review?
If I can step on this, one of the things that we've done in past for Essa specifically, and less so I think for high school grad, is that the staff sort of made a decision on whether or not it was identifiable in the first round, and if the discussion sort of led to, well, we need someone who fits this profile, we added that, you know, staff was part of that conversation. We could say, yes, this person would fit that profile because of this affiliation or whatever it was. So, I mean, we're not going to be able to redact everything, right? Because otherwise then you wouldn't have an application. So, you know, we'll do the minimum redaction as possible to make it fair. But I think that's where that piece of it would come in. At least that's the way we've done it in the past.
That works for me. I mean, on this, I will say I am inclined to rely on recommendations from the staff for a way to do this that seems fair and justifiable to public scrutiny. And then to ask questions as we go with your guidance, because you have run these processes before, I have not. And my inclination here is, with the pool of 77 and the cross section of folks that I'm seeing in the spreadsheet Alex provided, we have some really strong applicant candidates. And I feel like we're pulling from a deep pool. So I feel good at relying on staff to tell me where I need to butt out, not ask so many questions, and where I'm, good to ask more questions to make sure we've got a representative pool. Ruth, you look like you have something to say.
Well, no, I'm just thinking. I mean, I don't have a good recommendation. I mean, I get the sensitivities. I also think there's so many different kinds of representation, and I know I'd love to be able to have a greater sense of what the organizations are, because that's part of what you're assembling, but I'll just say that as a comment, not as a, just for staff to think about as they are redacting. I think it's all useful.
Okay. So in terms of an actual rating, again, are there processes you've used in the past that make sense? Because I'm trying to think about how we keep it as simple as possible to make it a more streamlined and productive discussion on the 19th. Is it like first choice, second choice, third choice? Is it a strongly prefer, strongly don't prefer, like a Likert scale style? How have you done those ratings previously?
I can speak to, since all of you have the pool of, student advisory committee applicants or student rep applicants, the way that the staff brought forward the recommendations to the state board of who could be a representative is the pool of applicants was divided into, each applicant was reviewed by 2 individuals. And there were, I think, 5 to 7 different buckets or areas that each applicant was rated on. And from there, the staff member assigned a point value to that. Those points were aggregated to create a final score that determined that applicant's placement. That might be a little bit too complicated and cumbersome, and we could do something to your point, Jessica, with like the Likert scale, which I kind of like, or simple, just like rank choice, or even just like ranking the candidate, to the Likert scale point, just like giving them a score of 1 to 5, just like at face value. And maybe there's like 1 or 2 big criteria that you want to make that decision on.
Ruth and Karen, given previous processes, what insights would you offer to how we ought to do this in a way that's fair?
Well, after we collected all the applications, screened them, then we went back and looked at our priorities about what group of people or what expertise the applicants had, to see where we were missing, we had gaps. I'm just saying, so if we need, like a used car, we have one picked, and that's when we did our closest evaluation of our pool, to make sure that we had a representation or from a larger group of people than just everyone who owned the gas station.
Mm-hmm.
Okay, and that was our last round. We could say we didn't have anybody who owned a Chevrolet place, so we need to find someone who owns a car dealership or whatever. That's how we filled in the gaps, and then we did one last go through to make sure that we had every potential kind of I can't say potential, but who had people who had different viewpoints, but were all working for the same cause.
Got it.
Well, everybody on the board to think the same, on the task force to have the same thoughts about everything. We wanted to have some diversity in processing. And that's when we closed it out.
Karen.
And so can you, whoever, I guess it was Alex, just summarize again sort of how you're proposing to do it? So we would get these 75 applications, and each would have it would already be, how are you saying that it would be screened? in some way?
It would be de-identified.
No, I know the de-identification, but then is that all? But I thought you were also with the Likert scale, or that's what we're doing.
Yeah, like that's what I think we need to identify first, what would the committee think would be the best way to do the first screen of these applicants? Is it something as simple as a Likert scale, to Dr. Sutter's point, strongly disagree, strongly prefer, some middle things, or a simple numeric score 1 to 5? You would prefer to do a blind rank choice and pick your top 5 candidates? Or is it something that potentially is a little bit more nuanced, that you identify some particular criteria by which you would want to rate these applicants on, and there's a point value that's assigned, and then that might get aggregated to create a final sum score that we can use to determine top candidates? I think it's all up to you preference wise. I think all of the options that have been discussed are doable, and doable for us to produce, to facilitate.
So I'll say this: if we are all interested in reading all 75 applications, which may be 100 by Monday, who knows? My inclination is to keep the screen more simple. To say, if we're all reading all 100, you're ranking them 1, 2, and 3. Definitely want them on the committee. Would be happy to have them on the committee. Don't think they belong on the committee, or wouldn't be my strongest choice. And I don't think I would make it more complicated than that, if we're all going to read all the pages, because I think we have to be mindful of the workload and time. And then I think the question would be, like, if you end up in your own pile of 100 with 50 in the number 1, you got to go back again and make sure that you're not sending, say, any more than a third of the applicants in your number 1 category. And that could be something we say to one another, that you're not sending any more than a third of the total applicants as your first choice, because we want to make sure that we have a manageable group to discuss as a team. If that's workable, I think that keeps it simple enough. I think the thing we're looking for is, we said we wanted to have a committee that could do really 3 big things. That's going to be able to review the standards and advise us on areas where updates and revisions are needed. Folks who have the capacity to do that in the way that we've outlined for them. So we've said we want standards that are anti-racist, standards that are culturally responsive, standards that will increase content in the early grades, standards that will promote civic engagement, so that we're reading through the applications with those things in mind. Who's going to help us do that? And then I think the last question is, we want a representative sample. So we want to make sure we've got folks from DC. We want to make sure our group is racially and gender and ethnically and background diverse. And I think that's where we're going to count on the staff to tell us, hey, if I picked out a top third of applicants and they're all white women, well, that's going to be a problem. We're going to need to work on the diversity of that as part of our discussion. I'm worried that sounds too simple, but I'm also hopeful that that makes it a viable process that each of us can commit to in a short time frame, and will lead to a rich discussion. Does that work? So I can type that up so that it is clear, and that we all have it. But the general notion is, we're all getting all the applications. We are ranking them 1, 2, or 3 with no more than a third of the total in our 1 pile. We'll be giving that to the staff. We're reading in mind all the things we asked them in the application. And then the staff is going to help us make sure that we have a diverse set out of that pool. And when we meet on the 19th, we'll talk about that with those details provided by staff.
And so what we get from the staff, it's more than what we're seeing here. It's going to include some of the why they applied, some of their backgrounds and experiences and stuff. Okay.
That's my hope, is that we'll be reading their longer response questions, as well as their will we have their demographics as part of the de-identified thing? I should have asked that.
Well, that's what I think I was suggesting before, kind of posing that question, and didn't ask it explicitly, as to whether or not it should be redacted in the first review or not. And so I'll ask it at face.
My gut is, having just talked myself through that, I think it would be great to have their demographic information and identifying information about role and content comfort without, like, so for instance, I know right away who row 6 is because I know that person. So I know who Chyborn Free is. And I wouldn't want to see that in my review. What I would want to see is consultant, early childhood education, yes, experience with standards review, resident of Ward 4 kind of thing. Does that make sense?
Yes.
Okay.
I
Well, with everybody else?
Yeah. I think that makes sense, Jessica.
Okay.
I do. The one thing I would just add to, am I on? I'm sorry, I'm just having a hard time seeing what I'm on. Or not. And I don't know how to do it, but, and I guess I've sort of said it is, the more that can be said, you know, that it's a higher ed institution, or it's a government agency, or it's a, obviously a high school, I guess. I mean, anyway, the more the merrier in my view. It's just, and I realize that creates a tension, so that's all I'll say.
Yeah, I mean, for me, the concern, Ruth, is that, like, I know, like I said, I know who Chyborn Free is. I know the executive director or the founder of the Community Enrichment Project. I could take a pretty good guess at the ANC 6B commissioner. So I wouldn't want to be playing the name game in my head as I'm like, who are these people, when I'm trying to make a decision based on what they said they want to contribute.
Yeah, no, I know. And the tension is, in some cases, it's important to play a name game, right? I mean, it's important to know that, I mean, I'll use an example. Well, that you're getting a high school teacher who has a lot of experience in a set of a set of organizations. And sometimes we know them, right? And it's, so it,
Well, let me see this, and I think it's fine that we've spent this much time on this, because I think it's an important discussion. One thing I know is going to be true at lots of points during our social studies work is that you can't separate education and politics. So no matter who we pick for this advisory committee, there are going to be people who tell us we picked wrong.
right.
What I want to be able to justify is that we did the best to pick people based on what we thought they would contribute. And we're able to honestly say to the public, we didn't just pick our friends. We didn't just pick people we like. We didn't just pick people that we thought would confirm our priors. So to me, this helps with that.
No, I mean, I think that, I think
we're going to
right.
accuse us even with the blind review. Like, I'm terrified of not picking Laura Fuchs, because if I don't pick Laura Fuchs, someone's going to pick on me for not picking Laura Fuchs. And I use her name simply because this is the one thing Laura and I agree on. I don't think we could ever argue over social studies. Like, the two of us are just in step on that. So I do worry about the dangers of a blind review, but I also think it's just more defensible. And I do hope the staff on the 19th will be able to help us see our blind spots, to say, like, hey guys, you didn't pick the curriculum director for DCPS.
Well, that's what I was going to come back to, is I think there are certain people we really do want on. So if there's a corrective for that at the end, that also makes me feel more comfortable.
Okay. Yeah, I agree with you, Ruth. I think the 19th should be our corrective. And I think, again, I want to count on our staff, who I trust, to tell me there's a couple of things that we want to make sure you're aware of who is missing from your applicant pool that we think you may want in your applicant pool. Okay. So I'll type up my understanding. I'll compare it with the great notes I'm sure Sarah or Darren or Alex or all of you are taking, just to make sure that I'm confirming that the way I understood it is the way you understood it, and then we'll share it with the committee. Are there any other questions on timeline or plans for review? I put some of it in the note in the agenda doc, so if you're looking at it, you've got, like, my high level understanding.
I just
On to the next thing.
one clarification question, just to make sure I'm clear. So the application will be open now until Monday close of business. So Monday, 5 p.m.
And when the staff sent, when whoever is sending, can staff just put the meetings on our calendars that we've agreed to?
Okay. Okay. Then with the remaining half hour of our time together, I want us to turn to what we want this group, once we have them assembled, to actually do on July 7th, because we do not have another committee meeting before that time. So while we will have a working session, and while I will absolutely work with folks over email, I wanted us to at least get comfortable with that first meeting. So it's hyperlinked in the agenda. I'm also happy to share it if folks need me to. It's the same document we've used before because it's the syllabus. All I did was expand on what I think we ought to give for pre-work and what I think we ought to do on the 7th. And I wrote it sort of draft agenda E with lesson plan objectives. For those of you who were classroom teachers, SWABOT, students will be able to. Here we have the advisory committee will be able to. Because old habits die hard. So I think that before the first meeting with thank you so much, we're delighted to have you. We're glad you said yes. We want to make sure we send everyone a copy of the current standards. I don't think we're actually going to dive into the content of the current standards in our first meeting, but I want people to have that as their welcome gift to give them the maximum amount of time to really read and spend time in the standards so they know where we're starting. I thought for the first meeting, 2 objectives would be to develop norms for our meetings and a shared understanding of the final product we're working towards, and to build knowledge on what learning standards are and what valuable processes other states have used in doing this work. If that were agreeable to, I broke out for a 2-hour meeting, which is what we've told people we're going to have, instead of introductions. Who are you? What's your role? Glad to be here. 15 minutes of discussion around norms, starting with a few basic suggested ones like watch your talk time and, be comfortable with non-closure, and some of the ones that I've seen used very well in current meetings. I'm certainly happy if this agenda makes sense to folks. I will create a full facilitators agenda and we can go back and forth on that over email. Talking really in depth and making a big chunk of our discussion about what are the final guidelines we're giving to OSCE, and what are the parameters of that, using what we've already discussed and agreed upon with OSCE, what we've talked about as a committee before. Taking 20 minutes and maybe having this on what's the difference between standards and curriculum, and what are learning standards? Why do we have them? And then maybe breaking folks out into small groups. I don't know if it's possible in WebEx. I should ask that now. I know it's possible in Zoom. I know it's possible. I think it's possible in Teams. I don't know if it's possible in WebEx. If it is possible to break folks out into 2 groups and basically talk about recent state standards revisions that other states have done, and how they engage the public and how they shared things. North Carolina, I shared with Alex, has a great website. They are just at the end of their process. We had already looked at processes in Michigan and in Colorado. So I think there's a couple of good examples that we could just give so that folks on the advisory committee get comfortable with what has this look like in other places, what makes sense to us in DC, what might not make sense, and build a shared understanding. And then closing out the meeting with making sure everyone's got the remaining calendar of meetings on their own calendars, talking about possible subcommittees by either grade level or content area, sort of what people's temperature on that, and then require people read the standards by August 4th, maybe in subgroups, right? So maybe we break folks up into the same way we did as a board, elementary, middle, and high school. And maybe we provide them with the same guiding questions we used when we reviewed them as a committee. So that's my first draft. Would love thoughts and feedback on how that sits, what's missing, what did I forget? Ruth.
So that agenda sounds very good. I don't have anything to shift on the agenda in terms of prep and sort of going forward. A couple of thoughts. One is, can we provide people with? I mean, I'd be interested in this. Because you talk about what's our shared understanding of what we're going to produce. Do we have any examples of that? Preferably more than one. So we're not saying it should look like this, but some ideas that give us ideas of grain size and that kind of thing.
I don't, but I can certainly look and see what other folks have.
I mean, I think that would be useful. And then the stuff that you mentioned that you had looked at, that we as a committee have looked at, the standards revisions in some other places, some standards. Can we set up, and I've talked to John Paul about doing this in research too, like a web page or assembly page that is for this group. So they have one place to go and all the stuff is there, the memos, the examples, the exemplars.
What'd you say?
Yeah, I mean, I love the idea of that, and I think we could certainly we could do a web page. I don't know a darn thing about web design, but we could also do a Google folder where that's, through our dc.gov enterprise accounts, where that is public, and where folks can access it, much the same way that you get all the Google Docs for agendas and drafts of things for social studies. I just have a social studies in DC folder on my dc.gov Google account. So we could create a form for the committee.
Yeah, what we've done in the past too is that all of those materials then are also public, and so we publish them on our website. But we can do that through Assembly and through our SBOE website as well. Each meeting would have, could have its own folder, and there could be just a general folder of like additional materials and things that would be available for people to look at.
But I like that idea a lot, Ruth, and I absolutely agree. Like having a place that folks go to makes the most sense. I'm actually going to put this in the chat, a link for folks to just take a look at. North Carolina apparently built their social studies site on Google Sites. So, it is possible to do the same kind of thing, to actually create a landing page. Again, I don't know anything about that, but, someone might.
So part of the challenge with that, in general, is that it's not then supported by Octo. And so if it's not supported by Octo, that means it's all us doing all of that stuff. And
that's my official response to that one.
The North Carolina DPI has a lot more IT staff than me. So
yes, indeed.
Now, while I have built websites in the past, they don't look like this. So I just want to be cautious about like too much more than what we can do without having it be through Aussie. Or
one question I have. So in general, dc.gov websites are awful because they use Drupal and it's stupid. That's my, again, official response to that. However, one site that is not stupid is when DCPS does their modernizations and they put all their information up. Who runs that?
DCPS has its own IT firm.
Because all the other good websites that Aussie runs are actually run by Tembo, and it's outside. So, okay.
Yeah, most of the time, if it's a good website, it's not through Octo.
Okay.
And it's not that it's like, Octo doesn't know what they're doing. They do. They're very talented at some of the things they do, but they're also very limited in terms of what, there is a format which DC government employee websites have to follow, and we have to follow that unless we want to separate ourselves entirely and then pay for that service through an outside vendor.
Got it. Okay.
Karen, I saw that you may have to drop off.
Yeah. Thank you.
Thanks, Karen.
Thanks. I'm sorry. Bye-bye.
But Ruth, point is well taken, and I think we'll sort through what is the
Great.
least painful way to make a clean, easily accessible place for
And then
folks.
the specifics that I think would be useful for people to get there, just to restate, is do we have any examples of what the what the final product would look like? Examples of the revisions made in other states somewhat recently, maybe best examples of social studies standards from other places. That's all. And then my other question is, how long do you intend this meeting to be?
2 hours.
2
And
hours?
on that syllabus, I broke out what I thought the times were. Obviously, these are fungible, but basically, the 2 big conversations are around revisions, the guidelines to OSCE being a half-hour discussion, and exemplar processes from other states being another half-hour discussion, with the discussion of the difference between standards and curriculum as sort of the meat in the middle of that sandwich, and everything before and after it taking up the remaining time. I don't think we are going to keep people's attention on the phone for more than 2 hours. And I definitely don't think we would do it if we don't find a way to break it up a little bit. That's why I'm hoping there's a way to break out into small groups. I will tell you, I'm running a 3-hour board meeting in 2 weeks, and I am dying on the inside that we have to spend 3 hours on this. But
Don't say that too loudly. The working session is going to be nice and long tonight too.
well, to be fair, in defense of our working session, we have multiple topics. We have guest speakers. Like, at least things break up the flow. I'm going to be in a virtual room with the board of a nonprofit for 3 hours.
So one of the things that Darren just posted in the chat too is that there are other types of WebExes that we have not used in the past that can be used for breakout sessions, including trainings, and so we can do that. It's just a matter of setting up a different type of meeting.
Okay. If that's a feature we have available to us, and you are able and willing to take a look at how we would do that, I'm very happy to hop on another call and make sure I can be a willing partner in the facilitation of it. But I think that would be great, because I do think it'll be a better experience for folks and a better alternative to in-person meeting, if we can do some of the same kind of things we'd want to do with folks if we have them in a room.
Yeah, no, I agree, and I think that's totally fine. It'll just be let us work with it first and get comfortable, and then we'll make sure that you have the training too.
Yep, I appreciate that. Marcus, I know you have a crazy day, so I don't want to make you think too much more about other things, but is there anything that we have missed here that jumps out at you that would be worth us talking about in this first meeting?
No, I thought all of that was good. I admittedly had to pop out for a minute or two during this last conversation, but no, I thought we hit all the marks from what I could hear. But I'll make sure to look at the notes and catch up and drop anything if I.
Your new boss is on MSNBC, so I just want you to know that.
Oh yeah, well, he's leaned in 2 feet first. And so he's really working us this week, which is why I'm all over the place. Ben Jealous just became my boss this week, so.
No small thing. All right.
And he has no sense of
your friend as the new mayor of Baltimore. The city is very excited.
Yeah, no, I know. Yeah, but yeah, I mean, Ben has no boundaries, so he works at like 11:30 at night and like sends emails and stuff. So.
It's the old people forum.
Right, exactly.
Well, thank you, Marcus. I have no doubt that you are a good student and will review the notes, but just wanted to make sure I didn't fail to ask your take. So I think then what I'll do is I'll take this agenda and I will break it out into a more detailed facilitators agenda, which for me means I'll take all this, I'll put in links to the kind of exemplars Ruth is asking about. I will make the dreaded PowerPoint deck to like how I would lay out these slides. I would love staff support in putting it into appropriate SBOE template and like any, artistic design stuff. I'm not great at that, but I'm very happy to take this to the level of detail that it needs for a good meeting, and to build out the deck, and then plan to share that with folks by our July 1st working session, so that you all will have it in advance of that. We can talk about it in the social studies update at the working session, and then we can make any additional changes we need to before the meeting on the 7th. Does that sound reasonable? Cool. So the last thing on our agenda is kind of fun. And I just thought, given everything else in life that is, you know, heavy, that this could be a way to combine the heavy with the fun and focus on social studies. The National Council for the Social Studies is doing this video submission campaign on Social Studies Matters, and they're looking for submissions from groups and organizations. So if the committee had any interest in us submitting a something to the National Council for the Social Studies, they can be images, they can be video clips, they can be quotes or testimonials, but I thought it could be kind of fun to do some sort of a, like, maybe we all write something on a sign and take like a Brady Bunch picture, or any number of things, but we have until the 22nd to do it. So if folks are interested, I can start a like email with a, what about we do this? And then maybe we could plan to do it, I don't know, after our public meeting or on the 19th when we're all back together as a committee, and then I can submit it on behalf of the Social Studies Committee of the DC State Board of Education. Does that sound reasonable? I've got a couple of ideas on what I think could be fun, but they're basically saying that like the video clips could be as short as 15 seconds or as long as 2 minutes. And they're looking to say social studies matters because studies is. One I think that will be Ruth's favorite. Social studies is critical for the health of a democratic society because. And I think it would be really fun for us to each sort of put up our quote on like what we, a sentence starter with our answer completed, and then submit it to NCSS. You know, something, like I said, something fun combined with the heavy, and a way for us to keep getting elevation for both our work as a state board, but also for, you know, the importance of this work in the current moment in America.
And one other point of personal privilege or something in the spirit of that, of the democratic process, I also want to acknowledge that Marcus's new boss, Ben Jealous, worked for my organization, Frontlash, a voter registration organization, but he's younger than me, so he was there after I got there, but that's my original place, and where he, I think, did a lot of stuff, so there you go.
Yeah. And the Democratic Society thing made my socks roll up and down too, Jessica. So.
I mean, I think I told someone the other day, I really just want to write a letter of apology to all my middle school civics students to tell them, like, I'm so sorry that what I told you this isn't what it looks like right now. I haven't lost hope yet. Please don't lose hope either.
But see, for me, so I didn't teach, but my kids, you know, I taught my kids, that's it. But I want to say, see, I told you checks and balances mattered, or I told you that it mattered that we have a federalized system, that you don't want all the power in one place. I told you the commander in chief should, you know, blah, blah, blah. So, you know, that's how I think of it.
I mean, on that note, though, one of the students I've been most closely following on social media, one of my former students is an MPD police officer. And watching him process all of this has been fascinating, because he knew he wanted to be a police officer when he was in my 8th grade class. And he was the kind of kid who, like, I took a bunch of boys to a lacrosse game my brother played in out on the Eastern Shore. And on the way back, it started to snow. And here I am driving a minivan filled with middle school boys that I got permission slips from their parents for in the snow over the Bay Bridge, having a total conniption. And this young man, Reggie, was like, Miss Sutter, I got you. We're going to be fine. You don't need to look at your phone. I'm going to tell you all the directions on how to go. I can get. He was that kind of caretaker as a 14-year-old. So to watch him process this now and to know his reasons for getting involved with the police force, you know, it colors this moment very much to think about his perception of his role and why he does what he does and how the public perceives it and what this means in a democratic society. It's all, I don't know. I haven't had a ton of lighthearted moments lately, I guess is what I'm trying to say. So glad to be able to combine the serious with at least a little bit of smiling in the process. I don't have anything else. So we finished 9 minutes early. I'll use the 9 minutes to get done a bunch of things, but here's what I understand are next steps. I am going to make sure I have clarity on what I think our review process is. I'm going to compare those notes with the staff's notes on this, and we'll send it to the committee. We are extending the deadline for the application to Monday at 5 p.m. and doing additional targeted outreach to the folks we talked about. We will, once we get the de-identified applications from the staff, send our complete ratings, these 1, 2, 3, to the staff by June 18th, so that we have a social studies committee meeting to dive in on more detailed review at 11:30 on Friday the 19th, with a planned public announcement the next week, 6/24 or thereabouts. I'll have the facilitators agenda and the deck for the public working session on July 1st, so that we are ready to hit the ground running with our newly named advisory committee on July 7th. And the team is going to look at the new kind of WebEx we can run so that we can have some breakout rooms as part of that. I'll make a plan B in the agenda just in case, but operating under the assumption that we can do breakout rooms, definitely plan A. All right, friends, thank you for all of your thoughts this morning and for being part of this. I will see you all soon enough at the research meeting.
See y'all soon.
Bye,
Guys, thanks, everybody.